And the Holy Gospel for this Sunday is found in John, the 21st chapter. After these things, Jesus appearing to his disciples after his death and resurrection, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he showed himself in this way. Gathered there were Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of the disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." They said to him, "We'll go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples didn't know it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" Fishermen know how lovely that a sound is. "You don't have any fish, have you?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net into the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It's the Lord." So Peter, when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, for he was naked. I'm not sure why we needed to know that. And jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, only about 100 yards off. When they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there, and fish on it, and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And though there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them and did the same with the fish. The gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I'd like to invite the children to come and join me for the children's message. So this is the final sermon in our series of the great outdoors, and I'm feeling a little hyper today because I spent last week at a hermitage. So I spent 5 days not talking to a soul, except I called my mother every day. So I need to talk. So this might be longer than you expect, just so you know. The theme for today is lakes and rivers and streams. Oh my. We want you to hear a little bit of the Wizard of Oz, you know. I would do the dance, except I find myself praying for the first verse of the Old Testament lesson. Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. I can't quite do the lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. We've got lakes and rivers and streams. Oh my. I want to tell you about my greatest experience with a lake. It was probably 6 or 7 years ago. My best friend and I go camping from time to time, tent camping. And she got this great idea at the national park that we were at that we should rent a fishing boat and go out on the lake. Not to fish, just to, you know, be out there and look around. And the boats, you rent them, and then you can rent a trolling motor. So that's what we did. I said, "This is not a good idea, Judy. Neither of us are really water people. We don't know boats." And she said, "It's a piece of cake. They wouldn't rent them to just anybody if there was going to be a problem." So we got the trolling motor, and we had to figure out how to put that on the boat, which turned out to be not so hard. And then we got out onto the water. We didn't have any trouble getting out there because that happened to be the direction the wind was blowing, which we didn't really notice as we were going. So we packed a lunch. That was Judy's idea. She thought it would be so fun to sit out on the lake and eat a lunch. And we got out on the lake. I couldn't tell you what lake it was. I couldn't tell you what park it was. But we got out on the lake, and it was really nice. But the wind kicked up, and we kind of let the wind blow us a little ways. And we ended up kind of beaching on this little rocky island. And Judy said, "This will be a good place for us to eat our lunch then, because we're here, we're not going anywhere." So we sat on the boat and ate our lunch, and then we figured out how to get back in the water, which we managed to do without too much damage to the boat. And then as we started to head back to the shore, back to where we rented the boat, we discovered that the trolling motor was not strong enough to overcome the wind. And we got the oars out, and I'll just say this is not my best gift. Judy was a little better at it. We started going, we gave up on the oars, and the boat went around in a little circle. And I don't mean it went in a circle, I mean it spun from the middle. Slowly, very slowly, so it was okay. And it did that a couple times, and we're trying to fight it. And finally I said, Judy, someday this is going to be a great sermon illustration, because I'll be able to talk about how we know where we want to go, but the wind came into our lives, and we couldn't get there quite as easily as we thought. And Judy said, shut up. So then the boat spun about 20 more times. Against all of our best work to make it stop. It kept going. And when it had done it about 20 times, Judy said, what are you going to preach now? So she's in the choir at Central Lutheran Church, just so you know. She is a good Christian, but not that day. And so finally, we realized we were stuck. And so Judy thankfully had her phone, and she called back to the park office and said, is this where we call if we need a water rescue? And they said, well, how could you need a water rescue? But they sent two nice young men, very nice young men, very buff, nice young men, with a boat that had a real motor, and they towed us back to water. And we got so that we were, within jumping out distance of the boat. And Judy said, we're climbing out now before we have to talk to these young men anymore. So she climbed out, and I started to climb out, and I fell out and got absolutely drenched. And I said, I am never doing anything like this again in my life. One of the things about water is that we learn things about ourselves, and we learn things about God, really important things. I loved the Old Testament lesson that Sherry read to us today. Waters will break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty grounds springs of water. The haunts of jackals will become a swamp. The grass will become reeds and rushes. I spent some time with Holly Despin. She and Dan live on Cedar Creek, right? Yeah, I got it right. I didn't bring my notes. Cedar Creek, and we sat out and looked at their little spot on the creek, because they have a little dock out over it, and nice chairs to sit in. And one of the first things that she taught me was about this grass that grows along the side of a river, that it's not really called grass, it's called sedge. And sedge is a long-leafed, it looks like grass, long, but when you feel it, if you run your fingers up it, it's got like little prickles, not bad prickles, but little ones. And the purpose of those prickles is to make sure that whenever water hits that sedge, that water is going to be directed down to the ground. So when it rains, that's where the water goes, because of the way the grass, the sedge, around a creek or stream is. I think that's pretty incredible. God uses these amazing little bits of creation to make a huge difference. If you think about that text from Isaiah, what happens when a stream starts to grow in the wilderness? Well, first of all, it's a miracle. How does a desert get a stream? And how do there become pools of water in the desert? So I'm not going to talk about the desert. I'm going to talk about the pools of water that I learned about at Holly's house that day. One of the first things I learned sitting at Holly's on the deck is that Holly's chair faced this way and my chair faced that way. And what we saw depended entirely on where we were sitting. What Holly saw was the water coming this way and hitting the bank over here and eroding. And what I saw was the water going that way and depositing the sediment that it had picked up over here, over there. And what Holly taught me was that every one of those little pieces that we see is its own micro ecosystem. And there are millions of micro ecosystems that have their own plants, their own little critters, their own activity that grow right there. You know what I love about that? It's just like our life of faith. Each of us, depending on where we sit, where we live, how we were raised, what our life experiences are, what gives us joy, what gives us sorrow, the good things and the bad things that have happened to us, all of those things make us our own little spiritual ecosystem. You are like nobody else. She knows that. And you are like nobody else, because what has formed you, what has made you, has made only you. And that ecosystem means that God knows exactly what you need, because only you are like you. Now, that can be a gift. It can also be a curse. It's a curse when we decide that I am the only me, and so I am the only right thing, and therefore things outside of my ecosystem are wrong, right? We all need to understand that each of us, our whole life long, is being shaped and crafted by what in our life is picking up water and what in our life is drifting and dropping sediment. And neither of those things are bad. One of the things I learned from Holly is that streams and creeks want to flow in a straight line. And so they do that. They come, and when they hit the bank, they pick up some of the sediment and they drop it so that over time they become straighter. But what really straightens them out, in case I say something wrong, make a horrible face. What really straightens them out is if they're in a floodplain and a flood comes. That straightens some of that out. But you know what? A straight stream or creek is eventually, because of the little things that are underneath it, going to begin to meander again. It's going to move. And so that's how it is in our lives. Sometimes it feels like we're walking on a beautiful straight path. We can see what's ahead of us, the sun is shining, everything's great, and then all of a sudden, we've picked up some sediment. Stuff in our life is not going so well, or something has broken in our lives or in our relationships, and we start dropping sediment. Do you know that all of the sediment from the Rocky Mountains to the Appalachian Mountains, all of that sediment, when it joins and moves toward the Mississippi River, it all moves south. Do you know that the sediment in Louisiana, 4,000 years ago, Louisiana was half the size it is now? But because of all of the deposit of sediment coming down the Mississippi, that Mississippi Delta has doubled the size of the state of Louisiana, creating a rich and diverse ecosystem that is varied because it's got all this sediment from every place. It's a miracle place. And that's what happens in our lives as we move through what the Spirit is doing and what life is doing to us. We are shaped and reshaped by that water, and eventually we join with water from everywhere, not just here, but everywhere, and we form a delta that can create whole new life. It's an amazing thing, and God does that in and through each one of us. God's Spirit moves, and when things happen to us, we reshape, and we reshape, and we shape, and we reshape as a congregation. This is an amazing, amazing miracle when you think about it. No one, nothing is static. Nothing will stay exactly the same. Water is a life cycle, as one of the kids said. It evaporates. And this is how it is in our lives as well. One of the days that I was at the Hermitage, I sat inside and listened to rain, because water evaporates and it forms clouds and it rains. And the rain reshapes the earth and it waters the earth. And water comes up out of groundwater and shapes the earth and reshapes the earth. God provides water, the Spirit that we need. God provides all that we need to grow in our life of faith. But we don't get to be in control of it. Wouldn't it be lovely if you said, oh, today is convenient. God, today you can send a little rain, maybe a little thunder, it's okay. God doesn't do that. Water falls. Storms come. Hail, like we had a couple weeks ago, happens and eats up the sides of our houses. How many of you had siding damage? Yeah, a bunch of you. Oh, I'm sorry. That's what's nice about apartment living. There's a ding on my wall. Sorry, that was a side trip. But this water is so rich, and it gives back to us. Sometimes it's raining, and sometimes it's cloudy, but God is always, always present. So here's what I'd like you to do this week. I'd like you to find a place of water, whether it's literally finding one or imagining one that you love. Think about, how is this like your life of faith? How is this piece of water like your life of faith? Because just like Jesus hollered to the disciples in the boat, you don't have any fish. I just think those fishermen had to just grit their teeth. Who's that wacko on the, rubbing it in? But then it was Jesus. And he called that because he wanted them to make a great catch of fish. Just like that, God is present. And God is waiting to do wonderful things. Not always in our control, but always in God's good work. So look for that this week. Some water. And how is this like your life of faith? Amen.